here today. Thanks for joining us too. If you guys want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from, that'd be great. So, Joe, I think we can just ask that question in the chat where they're calling in from. And then we got a quick poll for you, just kind of gauging your interest, kind of what's kind of brought you guys in here today, and just get to know you guys a little bit. So go ahead and take a minute, settle in, whether you're getting your walking shoes on or a cup of coffee or finishing up your lunch. Go ahead and settle in for the discussion today. Hey, Joe, see if you can share your camera now. You might be able to, as we're getting kind of settled in here.
Yeah, there we go. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Joe. You're clean shaven too. Hey.
I did, yeah. Different than yesterday.
Nice. There you go. Cool. All right. We'll give a couple more minutes while everybody gets settled in. And as we're getting settled in, everybody's joining the room. You know, Joe and I were talking about this, and you know, we think of a lot of times we're all sitting on webinars, and you know, we think of these kind of stiff presentations. So we call this, right, the fireside chat, because we think about how that was instituted back when FDR was saying, you know, I'm going to have these more informal, right, rather than stiff presentations or speeches, conversations where they're talking directly to the people, right? And so in our case here, as Joe and I were just chatting, we were talking about how we talk with HR practitioners and people in the business who are trying to implement solutions and technology. And that's really what we've been focused on the last 6 or 7 years between our two organizations. So Joe and I said, you know, keep it light, you know, have a nice discussion, ask you guys some questions in there. And Joe and I, we see that as like pretty important, right, Joe? I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, I think it's important. I think it's kind of form meets the actual subject topic, right? So it's important when you're in a high engagement culture that it's not stiff, right? It's more of a leisure style of communication. And we kind of want to match that in our webinar as well today.
Yeah, I like that. All right, so as people are getting settled in, we're just going to kind of set the tone for today. We got that quick survey that we popped up there. You guys go ahead and fill that out, give your feedback. We'll share the results here in a minute. But as we think about what we're going to cover today, and Joe and I probably go off camera on and off, depending on, you know, how we're going to facilitate through the session today. But what we're going to cover is we have some questions. You know, there's a great book, and I was joking with Joe about this, Questions Are the Answer. And we're going to talk through, after a brief introduction about ourselves, some of the questions we're going to go into, just things that we're thinking about. Joe and I have had between us, you know, roughly about 20 years or so experience in these software products, you know, selling them to HR practitioners, implementing them, doing things, but we'll talk more about ourselves. But we really think that's important, some of these questions, as we're thinking about the topic here, that really sharing them with you guys, sharing some of our knowledge and the research we pull together and how we talk to our current clients and prospective clients, and going into those questions with you. Now, we will be sharing some articles and blogs with you guys after the call. So we have curated a whole list of different articles and blogs that we've referenced some data from in the conversation. We're kind of weaving in throughout. That's all a resource that you guys will have access to. We'll be sharing with you guys after. So don't be worried about, you know, as I'm citing things, or Joe is, that you need to capture that stuff down. There's some leave behinds we'll give you guys in that. And then we'll open it up to you guys for questions too at the end. But throughout too, feel free to be an active participant. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Joe and I will be working together to kind of monitor that. We do want to make this a discussion, right? Between Joe and I, where we got our challenge questions back to each other, but to you guys as well. So if you'd like to take a walk and listen in and ask your questions, that's fine. You know, this time today is time for you to relax, just kind of think about some of the things that we're sharing as we go into this discussion. Okay. Well, Joe, well, I will pause my talking and just kick it over to you for a brief introduction about yourself to the team, and then we'll get going.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm really excited today to talk about employee engagement, driving a culture of being employee-centric, really, to adapt to kind of the way people like to work these days. So my name is Joseph Hammett. I'm head of sales at HR Cloud. HR Cloud is a company that's focused on really employee-centric applications that empower employees, drive productivity really across multiple aspects of the employee life cycle. I've been with HR Cloud since 2016. We've pretty much been a company since around 2016 as well. So we've always really been focused on trying to find solutions that empower employees. And that's one of the leading voices in the organization due to kind of what Aaron was talking about, talking to customers and prospects on a daily basis, really getting a pulse for what the industry is looking for, what's important to HR people, and also what's important to their employees. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that today.
Thanks, Joe. And then similar to Joe, as I was sharing with you guys, I've spent my time, at least the last 6 or 7 years, talking to prospective clients and doing demonstrations, but also implementing them too as well within software. So helping them navigate change management, helping them navigate the training that's involved with software. As a SaaS company, we have to think that training is lighter, but there's a lot of practice and science and evidence-based approaches too that we help clients incorporate within Engagedly. And Engagedly is a company that really helps you guys operationalize your people strategy. So we really think about your people strategy as being these components of how do we engage employees? How do we help enable them, right? And that development and those tools to drive enablement, and how do we help execute the strategy? Where we talk about, really showing those results in the analytics. So I've been working with them for 6, 7 years, as Joe and I were talking about, and I've had some classical training as a practitioner in the field of, IO and OD. So excited to talk with you guys today and have a discussion with some of these questions that Joe and I have put together. So if you guys want to take a walk and relax and listen in and chime in with your questions, drop them in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. We look forward to kind of talking with you guys today. So with that, so Joe, first question to you. So why are organizations experiencing issues with retention and engagement?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great way to start this conversation. So I see this really stemming from a change in workplace dynamics in general. It's twofold, right? First part is the pandemic. That's like the hot topic that really changes how people want to engage with their organization, and then people starting to look for other places that might meet their personal sort of feelings about how they should be working. And the other part even was before that, and I think it has to do with the changing demographics of the workplace, trending towards a younger workforce that, how they're being communicated with and how they're collaborating with their team becomes much more important. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just to kind of put this into, a good context, it's really expensive, right? I think we all know that as HR professionals to replace employees, right? That's why retention is so important. It can be upwards of 75% of their annual salary in loss of productivity and finding a new person, right? Mm-hmm. And people tend to, especially now, I think, and that's why we're seeing this even more, they tend to look for an organization when they don't feel like they're being valued anymore, and there isn't really much opportunity for them to grow. They really want to find purposeful work, right? They want to be able to spend time with their families, not just with their jobs. They want to be able to actually take vacation and not have to worry about work. They want to have a more entrepreneurial setup. Maybe that's working from home. We are social creatures, right? So when you start working from home more and maybe being more entrepreneurial, maybe working more independently, not always in a close-knit team, mm-hmm. we kind of lose a lot of those social connections that we might have had. And this, when there's a drop in poor management from mm-hmm. from a company, tends to lead towards employees searching somewhere else that might fit what they're looking for better. And also maybe they worked remote for the last couple of years, and now they're, employers telling them to come back home. I think that was in the news big time when Facebook started. Mark Zuckerberg said, everybody needs to come back. And Elon Musk, he said the same thing. Everybody needs to come back to the office. You have to be here. Both those companies are having a lot of problems right now. They're laying off a bunch of workers, but they're also losing a lot of their most productive workers by choice, by their own volition.
Yeah. I like what you shared there. It kind of goes back when I think about this, and I think about some like the classical education that we talk about, like what motivates people. and having that sense of autonomy and that flexibility. And that shift gave them that sense of, flexibility and the autonomy and a little bit more control when you're working from home. I think we work longer days, but I think that flexibility we've provided people to the experience, that if you take that away, and I think my answer to this question would have been different early in the pandemic, and rather than post as we're starting to ease out of it, the hybrid expectation is a requirement, right? We're seeing people are looking for that, especially a lot of the younger talent that's out there, because they see that flexibility and that autonomy. And we used to talk a lot about these lines in between like work and life. Like, I have a work-life balance. I can compartmentalize. So I think those lines are very blurred, and what we need in work and life are very similar. So those individual needs, if we're not meeting those individual needs that somebody has for recognition, for flexibility, for autonomy, that they may have or want in their personal lives in the workplace, as those things are very integrated, I think, you're going to experience issues with, dropping in engagement and retention, because you're not really respecting what the individual needs at the core. And I think that fundamental core of what people need is universal. And I don't think there's this line that we've created that really separates those two, at least basis we're seeing things happen. And to that point too, is like when we don't provide them opportunities for development, or if our development opportunities that we're providing them are overly rigid, because we live in more of a marketplace culture where we can seek out opportunities and things that we want in marketplaces. And I think talent development, the marketplace-based approaches, those are things that people are seeking out too. So I think companies that get very rigid in these paths and, X to Y, and being overly married to the jobs too, I think that also, it almost breeds like a lack of opportunity, because there's certain swim lanes. But I think those more open systems where people have more choice and discretion and autonomy, I think also lead to, increased engagement and that retention too, because they feel like, hey, there's opportunity. There's a way for me in here, but it doesn't have to be an overly strict path that they have to follow X to Y, but they have a little bit more control in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also, even though it's cliche, right? I think there's a breakdown of this old adage of, you live to work, right? I don't think people believe that anymore. It might not be the opposite either. It might not be you work to live. It might be that you work and live and kind of comes together, and both of them are happening at the same time, and that's okay. So you need to figure out ways to kind of work through that work-life balance where you're working and living your life simultaneously.
Yeah. I love that, the work-life integration side of it. Well said.
Awesome. So think about that, Aaron, you mentioned this hybrid work environment, and I think that's one of the main things we're going to be talking about today. So how have you seen the hybrid work environment impact retention and engagement?
Yeah, it kind of goes two ways. Well, I'm going to use probably more than two ways. But those who do it well and embrace it, it can really remove the distractions, right? It can increase productivity. You could save companies money. I think some companies are experiencing savings of like $16,000 a year, within their organization, just from embracing the hybrid work model. You see like 83% of employees are actually preferring this type of model too. So it's a requirement, right? To get talent to come in, you will ultimately save money and can increase productivity by removing some of the distractions. So that's like the good side of the hybrid piece of it. The other challenge though, and if we want to take more of a balanced approach, the impact, right? We see a lot of that stuff that Robert Cross was talking about in terms of how we work today in collaboration. 85% of our time is being spent between emails and meetings and on the phone. So there's this kind of, we've integrated work and life. Are we able to really turn ourselves off? There's the challenge. The way we're working with each other, we have a lot of meetings going on that may not be the most effective meetings. However, at the same time, we're also given discretion and autonomy. And those things are things we seek in work, having that flexibility, having maybe some more variety to move throughout your day that people could really enjoy, and being able to, like you said before, like take care of some of the life tasks while you're working, and not have to, separate, go out of the office, but actually doing that because your office is at home is a benefit. So I think there's these benefits, right, to flexibility that really help us. But also too, we have that the catch. If work and life are now seamlessly integrated, how do we turn it off? And how do we also, as managers, shift from a management style to where we're not having to monitor like a command and control type style that some managers might be used to award people more discretion and responsibility and build trust and those things that they're maybe not as comfortable with. So I think there's a lot of things happening there. The impact on retention engagement ultimately varies based on how organizations are preparing people and managers more specifically on how to manage people in these new working arrangements. And so I think a lot of it comes down to, how the organizations are preparing for it and equipping managers to make the transitions and supporting them with the soft skills, because they're going to be leading with people and interactions more so than processes, right? Because you want to be agile. So I've seen that mixed bag in there, and that's why clients will come to us a lot of times and ask, a lot of questions, and we'll ask a lot of questions back to really understand. And that's why I'm hearing a lot from them too, out there.
Yeah, well said, Aaron. I think really the biggest thing here with the hybrid work environment is, with the almost mandated hybrid or remote work that a lot of companies had over the last 2 years or so, we're kind of coming out of it now the last 6 months or so, is there's almost now an expectation of autonomy and flexibility in the workplace, right? So it's something like 63% of all job seekers, this is from LinkedIn 2022, say that the number one thing they're looking for is work-life balance. That's their top priority when they're looking for a job, or even determining whether they want to stay with the job they have now. And even on the other side, something like 36% of employees have actually left their job without finding a new one, just because they said, hey, this isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
I want a different work environment. And I think that just really has to do with, there's a cost savings, there's a productivity savings when you don't have to commute back and forth, especially if you're in some of these industrial metropolitan areas within the United States where it takes you, let's say West LA, where I used to live, takes you 45 minutes to go 5 miles. You might live close to your office, but you're spending a couple hours, up to 4 hours sometimes, just getting back and forth from the office. It's like half your workday added on top of what you already are doing. So
yeah. And when you talk about the commute, I mean, the environmental benefits too, that we don't, those types of things as we think about sustainability and the priority, those priorities as they're really becoming a key focus point of, corporate social responsibility and the things that people are seeking to with organizations they're joining, that's also factored in there. And then obviously, mental health and well-being, just having, the things that people are experiencing because of some of the distractions. You made an interesting observation too about LA traffic. I laugh about anybody on the international side who's joined us, and we're as a global company. I think of my colleagues that are in Bangalore. It probably takes them even more time to travel less distance. So I think we might have it better than we think we do here in the U.S. in a lot of ways, because there are other parts in the world too that, they're dealing with it, and to a degree that even goes beyond LA traffic for you, those of you out in LA. So be fortunate, right? So Joe, what do you think organizations can do to better understand if they have an issue with retention and engagement?
yeah, so I think it really has to do with, you need to get feedback from your employees and your workforce, right? Because a lot of the things we've just talked about, every company has employees that are at some maybe lower level of engagement due to all the different things we just talked about the last 15 minutes or so. And according to Gallup, 33% of American workers are engaged in their job, so a third. And 52% say they're just showing up, so going through the motions. It's kind of like the new term that it's not as hot as it was maybe a month ago, but this quiet quitting, right? So these guys showing up and just kind of slowly disappearing. And then 17% will actively say that they are disengaged. Like, it is what it is. So how do you find out who fits in which one of these categories? And the best way is to run surveys to determine how engaged your employees are, what type of engagement you have. And there's those three types: actively engaged, not engaged, actively disengaged. And you want to make sure you start implementing processes and technologies and things that we'll get into in a little bit to get as many employees actively engaging. You know, you want to be able to break it down by business unit. So oftentimes people working in the office might have a higher level of engagement just due to the traditional modes of communication and collaboration and social creatures being near each other. And then those quiet quitters that might be working from home, you need to figure out who they are. And I think survey is the best way to do it. And that really, if you can, the more data you have and more information, the better you can start putting in processes to really drive employee retention and reducing turnover.
I mean, I love this question. Now, I'm not going to disagree and say surveys, because as my classical training is rooted in surveys. So when we're thinking about, needs assessments, engagement surveys, those are great tools, right, to help you as a diagnostic. So I think that understanding, okay, it's like going to the doctor. You got to get your checkup. I think engagement surveys are a good way to do that. Now, when we do them, I think there's we've been doing this for about 30 plus years now. We've seen that evolution from satisfaction to what we call employee engagement with first break all the rules. And we've kind of changed that construct around. There is some very good evidence-based approaches to adhere to. So I'm actually going to drop a book that I really like from my side as a practitioner, doing a lot of engagement surveys, having been a SME in employee engagement. This is one of my personal favorites, relatively new. So really good ways to kind of frame in your survey, to Joe's point, right? Your survey strategy, your sensing strategies, your listening strategies. Now, when we think about employee engagement, I will share with you just some highlights from what I really like about that resource. When you think about employee engagement, first consider your ultimate objective. Right? Like what, are you looking, is the purpose of doing your engagement survey? Is it long-term retention? Is it work engagement? Right. So one would probably look at one measurement of what you're looking at engagement in terms of commitment. The other might look at task stuff, right? Depending on what your ultimate objective is for the engagement survey. The other piece, you want to measure state engagement. It's, they're analogous to kind of like that check engine light, right? So when you think about the state, measure engagements, they're relatively easy to measure. And that's what we're talking about. What is commitment? What is job satisfaction? It sounds kind of academic, but these are good leading indicators. When you look at hard measurements, you're already behind the curve, right? If you're looking at turnover, you're looking at some retention statistics. To Joe's point about surveys can kind of get in front of that as a leading indicator to some of those things that might happen later on the behavioral side. The other piece, when you're doing engagement surveys, focus on your drivers. And the way to think about your drivers is making sure that you have things or items in there that are within your control, and then you're willing and able to change. After you've gathered that information, be sure to disseminate your results widely, broadcast them across the organization while protecting anonymity. People always talk about best practices. I think in the book that I shared with you, they make a really good point of saying, hey, best principles, right? Because what works at one organization may not work at another. So keep that in mind. Like, are your principles sound? Like, that's a good starting point when you're strategizing around your engagement survey. And then just making sure on that last piece, you're really committing to and communicating follow-up actions. So I think there are some really good evidence-based practices out there that if you follow, that will really amplify the effectiveness of your engagement surveys too. So I love what you said, Joe. And I think that's the only point I would add on is just, there's a science to it, right? There's evidence-based approaches that we can really adhere to that will really help us do this really effectively and get some good results that can drive some outcomes there. All right.
Awesome. Well, we've been talking around this as well, but how has the new hybrid style work environment affected traditional modes of employee communication?
Yeah, this is a conversation that we have pretty consistently with our prospective clients and our current clients, asking them this. So there's stuff anecdotally, and what we've measured internally. So one of the things that we noticed, and we think about the people strategy, one of the things we actually measured was back in 2019, we were looking at the just check-ins, right? So we have this ability to, on an ongoing basis, right, check in with our managers or check in with project managers. We just have an ability to connect, this kind of asynchronous communications that we can do out there. And we noticed that and some of those other asynchronous communications jumped, and that one specifically jumped by like 234% at the time. So we started seeing that spike in there. And then when we started thinking about this, we started saying, well, you're taking people out of the workplace, and a lot of research out there is saying that people, and there's some studies that'll say about like 80% of people believe that communication is essential for building trust. And then you go back to some of the quitting stats that you were sharing earlier, like there's about a quarter of people too that quit because they don't feel trusted. So if communication drives trust and we got to start communicating more, we did start to see this spike in this hybrid work environment of using technology to complement, right, some of these in-person interactions that they were having by checking in, by asking more like well-being questions. We actually saw managers, or from our experience and some of the questions they were asking more questions about like, hey, how are you doing? Right? Like, which, in the office, they're kind of checking up, they maybe some spot coaching, they jump in there, they talk to them like at their desk, and you can just have a conversation. I'd be curious, like how many times are they stopping by saying, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Because we shifted so quickly, there was genuine care and concern. So a lot of that, or those types of behaviors, started to come out too in some of these asynchronous channels they were using. Well, maybe they're more comfortable putting it in check-ins, who knows? But they were asking those questions, which was pretty cool to see. So I think that was pretty interesting on our side, and seeing some of that, and just that spike in asynchronous communications versus that synchronous communications. But we also saw that spike with Zoom as we're sitting here today, right? That's, synchronous communication that is better for like socializing, that we saw jumps in. But we saw in our platform a lot of jumps in things like feedback around goals that don't necessarily need to be in the moment shared together interacting. They can be very asynchronous. So that was pretty cool to see that on our side, and experience some of those things, and just seeing managers showing more care and concern through questions that they were asking on a more regular and consistent basis. That was also something that was, it was nice to see, honestly. That was kind of like one of those silver linings to some of the stuff we were experiencing in there.
Yeah, and I think you really mentioned it, right? This new working style requires a new communication style. And even within that communication style, I think it's really important to focus on the individual, right? So not everybody's going to have, each employee is different, right? So not everybody's going to have the same style of communication. And in that, we can't just have a boilerplate style of driving communication within the organization, where everybody is going to be receptive of an emailed newsletter. A lot of employees these days, and a lot of industries, don't even have an email. So they're not even getting that information, right? So we have to be able to adapt and implement processes, technologies, and just ways of communicating that fit the various styles of communication, right? Because that's what ends up really driving to this loss of high turnover and loss of retention, is when you have employees that just don't feel like they belong, right? So we have to kind of adopt technologies that really are personalized and processes to the individual to make sure everybody feels engaged.
Yeah, I like that, really connecting and to your employees and showing that. And I said it like care and concern, and Microsoft like to say it too as well, right? When they, there's that good kind of TEDx podcast, Satya Nadella talks about it. That it's good. I mean, we got to lead with more interactions and relationships rather than process if we're going to be agile in the future. I think that's a shift, right? That's a shift for a lot of managers. So yeah, and I put that poll up there. It goes, I'll leave it open for a little while. We'll kind of go into some other questions, but go ahead and give me feedback to that. So just kind of asking you guys what you experienced too, as it related to communication in there. Yeah, I think this is one of these topics too, Joe. We could sit here at length and the waxing and the waning, like the pluses and minuses. And we're seeing a lot of people here who's answering the poll. It's like for worse. I think that's something to really dig into, like where we're saying, why was it worse? What happened? What didn't we do as an organization? What did we do? And how the organization has a responsibility in there, and, what those top companies do, and us kind of setting the standard in there. So, Joe, what are some of the strategies to combat these challenges we may face in hybrid work environments?
I think, and you actually kind of answered this earlier, it's really, you need to be able to find your engagement drivers, right? So what is it that drives your employees? And most managers, according to a lot of the surveys out there, think they know what their employees want.
Mhm.
But it turns out more often than not, they are wrong. Or maybe it only fits some of their constituents, for lack of better words, right? So you really need, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, purposeful and meaningful and high responses in surveys. But really what you want to try to find out are 3 keys to keep an employee engagement retention high. The first one is you need to have a workplace and a communication style that is transparent and has an outlook towards the future, right? The second is, especially in a hybrid work environment or remote employees, you need to have something in there that is driving employee appreciation and recognition, right?
Mhm.
So I think the number one thing you saw when people move to a remote and hybrid work environment is a immediate drop in standard ways of recognizing and appreciating your coworkers, whether that's peer-to-peer or management to peer, right?
Mhm.
And then the last key is really to give them the ability for career growth and development opportunities, like we mentioned before, right? So I think really if you have strategies that really incorporate those 3 things, you're in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, that could be very redundant. Agree with all those things. I think what you said is spot on. The only other thing that was interesting that I see is we start to like, as we talk about these strategies, the making work less stressful and enjoyable is something that we really can do. We don't necessarily need to. I think we've done this in the past often with systems and processes. Who is it serving? Who are we building it for? That answer to that question is a lot of times, I think when we look at the outcomes or the outputs, it was like for the business. And I think refocusing and on the employee experience and putting them at the center of all of these things that we do, and we'll get into this as we talk about technology, is pretty critical. So when we can make work less stressful and more enjoyable, when we think about providing flexibility, that autonomy, those are things we can do, right? Boosting employees' sense of confidence, right? There's, stuff out there McKinsey put out there was great. I like how they talked about, their model for a lot of what we're chatting about here. The one additional thing here that we always think about is a resource, right? Time. And when they talked about time, is time in terms of reward. So it's connecting, like you said, like the reward piece, but let's not think of reward to, as a monetary element only. Like we have other things we can reward them with, but they use time as an example. Time's a great currency these days because we find ourselves in more meetings. We see that the research around collaboration, the time we're spending. So how do we encourage people to invest in their time and to preserve their time? And I think in doing that as an organization, we can actually combat a lot of these things because we put the value on the time that people have, right? Time is money, right? So I think that's a good way that we can, as an organization and being responsible, help equip our people with the tools to effectively manage their time. Now, I think a lot of us can say this is aspirational, right? We all wish we could do it well. But I think that's the only thing, in addition to what you were saying, that I really leaned into, and some of the things that we talk about is, time management, time allocation resources, even giving them services that can help them save time. Like if it's cleaning services or anything, that can really help them as they're, just again, valuing the time side of it too as well. So.
Yeah, great point. Before we kind of switch over, I think it's really important to think about the employee health, right? Physical health, mental health, employee wellness is a huge factor in developing a employee-centric process, strategy, technologies to really empower the employees to be as productive, healthy, and content as they possibly can, because that's really what's going to drive business results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So as you know, both here, drivers of technology working for SaaS-based technology companies that can hopefully help you guys out in mitigating some of these things. Aaron, what role do you believe, not just our technologies, but just technology in general, play in mitigating some of the challenges we face in a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, I think all of us, if we're saying that hybrid is critical, and we're saying that hybrid is going to be the requirement for organizations, then the tech stacks that we use and the tech platforms that we use, they really define the employee experience. That's what sets the tone, right? If you're not requiring them to come in the office, or how that onboarding process within, your exposure to the office. So we need to be very cognizant of that. And so the second we start getting them in these systems, they're going to make into their assessments about the experience that they're having with the system, which is a representation of the organization. And then it's just an extension as an artifact of the culture, right? These are just deep. When we talk about, that higher order topic that we're talking about today, when it comes to culture, it is. I mean, this is the employee experience. This is an artifact to your culture now. This is where a lot of behaviors and norms are going to be instituted. So then we need to accept that, right? So they're the new workplace, right? They're the new going into the office. Your tech stacks become that. So I think they fill this gap of like what we would have in these university campuses that we had before. I mean, how we piece these things together is going to, how thoughtful we are, how deliberate we are about the employee experience, and how much we value that, knowing that this is just an extension of it. So they're going to be assessing us on that too when they join. And you can bet a lot of the digital natives out there that are joining organizations, they're assessing you based on how these systems speak to each other, how that experience, if it's disconnected, if they have troubles day one. I mean, that is something we definitely need to be cognizant of, because now it's just changed. This becomes a new workplace in there. And the way I think to mitigate them is just being deliberate, right? Okay, what are the important things? What are the interactions that we value? Okay, how do we facilitate those interactions within the organization? How does technology support that? How do we make better decisions? What does that data look like? How do we then incorporate that data into larger perspectives, guide our decision-making and strategy discussions? Having single sources of truth where we can. So when we talk about people's strategy, kind of connecting, we always think about it like you just mentioned, as a company that's in tech, how do we integrate? And we always talk like an E3 model. How do we connect these pieces? Now, do we do it perfectly? No, but we're trying to achieve this ideal, right? And we're constantly trying to work towards that. And I think as organizations understand tech, it's not perfect. Tech's ever evolving. It's this iteration that happens. It's like always fighting entropy, right? Things come in, it's not perfect. We have to make decisions. And I think knowing that and embracing that as you move forward, knowing it'll never be perfect as well, it helps you have a little bit more compassion for your systems. It's kind of like having self-compassion when we're not perfect. Same way for our systems, because systems themselves too are they are imperfect, right? Because things are evolving and changing, and there are different needs for organizations. So, those are some of the things. In addition to that, I think what we can do to mitigate those is think about the workflows that we need to streamline. Where we need real-time data, what's the tech ecosystems. So just thinking about, how there's a tech ecosystem, how the pieces fit together, and then how we use those pieces to make better decisions and to ultimately create a better employee experience, so that the data we're getting into these systems too, and the interactions that we're driving through them really meet the needs of the employee. Because if it meets their needs, then we get really good data, and then we can make better decisions. And then ultimately that can kind of move us down to, like you said before, being more purposeful and driving some of those more strategic objectives that we need to, as we're kind of aligning as an organization to there.
Yeah, great points. The only thing I would add is, what if we think about technology just in general, not even within a work environment, right? So beyond just like driving, let's say electric car, right? That's a technology, or even a gas-powered car. That's a technology that moves us from one place to another. But like in our, let's say, leisure time, what do we really use technology to do? Two things, I think. One, to entertain ourselves. So there's a gamification aspect of it. The second thing is to connect with other people, right? Social media. So we should try to find technologies that have a gamification aspect in it, as well as, let's say, make a social media feed style mode of communication, because that seems to mirror the type of interactions that people are having in their outside of the work environment lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that stat we put up here too is, and just kind of grabbing that and really leaning on that. Completely agree with you. That gamified environment, making it fun, rather than it's like, it's more transformational and fun than it is transactional. And I think that's something that you'd share there that the employees really crave too. And that's a really good call out. And then we start thinking the way they assess us and the impact on them assessing like us through our technology is significant, right? If they feel like it really works for them, they have fun in it. I mean, the engagement goes up. And I think that one stat that we shared in here too, that we were joking about as we were prepping between you and I mean, it was pretty compelling. You saw such a jump in engagement just based off technology interactions, because it's so easy to get stuff to do, because there's a lot of apps that we use in our day-to-day that are super easy, right? And they fulfill that need. It's fun, it's easy. We don't run into any challenges. So yeah, well said, Joe, on that. Absolutely. So Joe, what will the future of employee engagement look like?
I think the future of employee engagement needs to reflect the way people live their lives, the way they work, and how it all comes together, right? So Prudential recently published a study that said 87% of the employees who worked remotely during the pandemic prefer to continue doing so and are going to actively look for jobs that allow them that type of flexibility. So we need to really keep that in mind, that the traditional workplace has been redefined, right? So it needs to be, and we've talked about this, people-centric, because I think, employees feel empowered right now, which is a good thing. And if you can empower your employees and believe in everybody's rowing in the same direction, you're going to have a very productive organization. And I think that really is the core thing that you should be thinking about with employee engagement, is how to get everybody moving in the same direction, where each and every touch point is actually personalized. So it's catered to the individual employee, but everybody's moving in the right direction. And really to get there, I think you need to involve the employees in the process of, to go to technology, deciding, right? So recently, more in the last year or so than the previous years, my sales team ends up doing demos, not just for the stakeholders, but also the end users, right? So they want to say, hey, I want to get my managers on this call and see what this looks like. I want to get my individual employees, a group of them from one location, to check this out, to see, hey, is this really something you guys want to do? Is this going to help you be more productive? Is it going to allow for better communication, connection, engagement, and all of these things we're talking about? So it really needs to be employee-centric. I think you also need to have clearly defined missions and goals, right? This gets wishy-washy when not everybody's working in the same location and sitting in the meeting room together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the last thing is giving employees the opportunity to actually propose new ideas and activities and feel like they're included in what the company's doing, the decisions that are being made. I think you see this as well. There's definitely a growing trend, especially from the younger generations, to not want to work for really large organizations. They like to work for smaller organizations because they feel like they have a bigger voice. They're heard, and they have a little bit more control over what their actual day-to-day activities look like.
Yeah, I like what you said specifically around the demo piece of it. Absolutely. I mean, it is essential that if the employee experience is critical to what we're doing here, and we're bringing them into the fold, so the employee's voice is being amplified. Corporate social responsibility, they're choosing smaller organizations a lot of times that are more socially responsible, they feel, or at least based on they rather than joining some of these larger organizations out there. I like the things, and the thing I'll add on, I look at this a little bit differently. This is what I like about these discussions, is I see things from a different perspective too. So when I think about employee engagement, I think about the evolution, right? So in the 90s, we talked about satisfaction. Like that was like the main thing we really talked about. And then they did everybody knows about the study, right? The Gallup ran, where they where they looked at first break all the rules. They interviewed all these managers, and they found out what are these drivers, essentially, right, of employee engagement. And then we broke apart employee engagement. It became something else, and we started to talk about employee engagement, measure that construct, and it was really a static view of, okay, it's a survey, it's a point in time, we have a model. These are, do we have these state measurements that we're getting into? Great. What do they lead us to? They're kind of like, again, the check engine light. We need to look at things that are leading us to say, hey, there's something we got to zoom in over here. It's like a diagnostic. So it's a really good diagnostic. I think what it's going to move to, and we're starting to see systems move this way, and we've seen it over the last 10 years or so, is that more dynamic view. Like, we still do the engagement surveys and they're laid over as a data point, but we have continuous engagement measurements that are coming in based on behaviors that we're saying are important to the organization. I think that's when you're talking about gamification and rewarding behaviors, that ongoing measurement of engagement is going to be essential in everything, right? Because we can see the interactions and the behaviors from where the work's being done, and those become an employee engagement measurement itself. And then we can lay it over some of those other things. I think those comparisons are going to be very telling, and it's going to give us a more rich and clearer picture of what an engaged employee looks like in organizations, and how it may vary from one organization to the next based on the composition of the organization. So I think that, for me, from a measurement standpoint, is very exciting. And as we start to lay these data points over and really start to understand, I think we're going to get more personalized to engage individuals and proactively do it as organizations and be more responsible, and employees' voices, and we'll be amplified, and they'll be feeling more like the listening strategy is a lot stronger. And I think engagement will roll into just broader listening strategy for organizations out there. All right, we got the final question.
Yeah, so I think this is why we're all here, right? So we want to figure out, how can we be proactive? So how can organizations proactively prepare for the future of employee engagement, Aaron?
Ooh, great question. I kept this one pretty simple. I'm actually going to borrow from this one. When I think about preparing for the future of employee engagement, I really liked, again, borrowing from something that I read in McKinsey. They had a really good article out there that talked about future-proofing companies, and they really categorized it into 3 distinct ways. And it said who we are, right? How we operate, and how we grow. And they broke that down further, but I really like that, because who we are is our purpose. So if you really want to engage employees, you have to own that purpose. That has to be, you have to have extreme clarity of what your purpose is, what's your mission, what's your values. That will guide you into making tough decisions, and people can align around that. In the hard times, you have a good mission, and you have a good mission, you know where you're going, people will stick with you when you're making tough decisions. If you don't have that clarity, I think people will waver and not understand, and then you won't have good rationale and logic, and people are probably hard to follow. Now, how we operate is just being understanding the business. So making sure people really understand how you make money. How do you grow? How do you add value? Right? How do you impact the environment you operate within? And then, all those pieces together, essentially, we think about the platforms actually having data-rich tech platforms. So we're being more informed, data-driven decisions, using a lot of the evidence that we gather. Like you said previously, prioritizing talent, right? To think of relationships and interactions rather than process. That's going to make you more agile. John Boudreaux likes to talk about it in First Break, and Work Without Jobs. There's another great book about how the work's kind of transitioning. I think the 3 key principles he talks about there to be agile, right? Prioritize individuals and interactions over processes, prioritize customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and prioritize responding to change over following a plan. Right? So I think those things are going to help us. And then ultimately doing things like we've known in the past, right? Be a learning organization, embrace learning, some of that Peter Senge 5th discipline stuff out there. If we can all become that learning organization, and then really taking a stance on our purpose and leaning into that. And I think those are just some things that come to mind when I think we're proactively doing that, right? If we're more agile, we really embrace that mission and purpose that we have, and we lean into that, and we articulate that across the organization so people can align around it and understand it. And then really prioritizing our talent, embracing the learning cultures, and then really having data platforms that speak well with each other to make decisions, I think are some ways that we can prepare for where we're going in employee engagement.
Yeah, I think data, agility, and really, I would just add maybe feedback, because that's really what you want to get from that data is really the key to being proactive. And I think the biggest thing is not to be afraid to make changes, right? So with that agility, you have to be able to quickly adapt. You have to be able to maybe have a flatter organizational structure that allows for feedback to move from the bottom to the top of the organizations very quickly, so that informed decisions can be made fast. And then back to the thing I've talked about a couple of times, be able to empower your employees, managers, individual employees, directors at all the different levels to be able to make the decisions quickly, so that not everything has to be run up the chain of command, right? So we need to be able to move quickly and adapt to how people engage, how people work, and all of that. And technology is definitely a key tool that can allow you to really streamline those different processes.
Yeah, well said. I love that. I love that closing kind of flatten the organization, right? That's going to make us move fast. Good listening strategies there too. I think that's awesome. All right, well, everybody, we held you a little bit over today. I mean, Joe and I get talking about these things, and we talk, we're just vessels, right? We're conduits to, right, others. I think, Joe, right, a lot of times where they're just coming through us, as we talk to prospective clients in the market, and then just working with current clients. So yeah, I mean, we brought it in the chat. There's some questions you guys gave us along the way. I think we closed out some of those, but given that we're over time, and we said time is a valuable resource here, Joe, right? I guess, Joe's clean shaven today, no beard in the picture, right? Or beard in the picture, no beard today. But it's good to chat with you, Joe, and everybody who stayed with us for this time. Thanks for listening in. We're going to send over some clips to you guys, to the different articles that Joe and I are referencing here. Both of our organizations have a lot of different blogs and articles we put together and we've curated for you. We'll be sharing as well as some of the information. From my side, thank you. And Joe, I'll let you sign us off here officially to the audience. I'll kick it for you to close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everyone, for joining. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and we'll look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate your time.